Okay, I think we can get started now. So, good evening, RK. Good evening, everybody. So, we've got a couple of things. This might be a shorter than usual stream compared to my normal every Thursday evening streams, but for those that are tuning in either live or after this has been recorded, if you're new to the channel and you like technology and maybe a little bit of gaming, or at least analyzing the performance of games on PC and also consoles to a lesser extent, because we do some of that on here, get subscribed to the channel. It does encourage me to keep making this sort of content. So with that said, welcome aboard, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get on started here. There's not a whole lot to talk about this week, to be honest. I had to kind of think through what I wanted to actually talk about. I know the big games that launched, I believe Alan Wake 2, if I'm not mistaken. Alan Wake 2 release date, yeah, that's October 27th, so never mind, that's later. That's like 2 weeks from now. But this week, it was Lords of the Fallen. That was, you can tell, I'm way more hyped for Lords of the Fallen, obviously on the screen here. And we'll be looking at some of the performance numbers. NVIDIA has released some not preliminary, but they've released their own benchmarks for the game. This game is unique because this is a UE5 game, and I think it is the first UE5 game other than Fortnite, which is basically a UE4 game ported to UE5, but this is a UE5 game from the ground up, as far as I know. It was built straight from UE5. It's the first UE5 native title to feature multiplayer. So this is a multiplayer UE5 game other than Fortnite. So made by a developer that is not Epic Games. So it'll be interesting to see how this game performs. And so far we have results from NVIDIA, and then I've gathered some anecdotal info that I've seen looking at various reviewers who got early access to the game, because the reviews for Lords of the Fallen are out as of this morning. So if you're interested in the game, you can check some of those out. We are going to be looking at it in depth, though, and I will be doing my own playthrough of Lords of the Fallen, and I am going to live stream most of my playthrough, kind of like I did for Armored Core 6 and Lies of P. Those are the two most recent games that I streamed. I did cover a little bit of Starfield, but not a whole lot in terms of my actual playthrough of that game. Hey, Sid. UE5, UE5 is actually pretty hard. Stream is freezing a bit. Oh, you know why? Yeah, if the stream is buffering, okay, I think I know why. It's because I'm preloading Lords of the Fallen. So, yeah, it's almost done. The preload's almost done, but yeah, I am dropping frames. So actually, maybe I should... Yeah, it's because I'm preloading Lords of the Fallen. Here, let me... It's almost done. It's like 25 gigabytes out of 31 gigabytes. My face is buffering. Okay, yeah, let me fix that. Yeah, you may have to refresh the stream. It should catch up now. It should be normal now. Yeah, that was because the game is actually preloading. It's still preloading, but it's almost done. It's because the option, I just saw the option on Steam to preload, and then I realized, oh, the live stream is starting. Maybe my internet will be okay. But yeah, I think it's overtaxing the internet. Yeah. So hopefully it's almost done. It's almost done. So if it buffers again, I may have to like refresh it again. But we'll see. But I will be covering Lords of the Fallen in depth. It is a pretty hard game to run. So actually, let's dive into it. So this is one of the reviews. This is the WCCF Tech review. Lords of the Fallen, frustration will always be at your side. So for those who don't know, this game is very similar. Okay, we're done preloading the game. So now I shouldn't have a problem with the internet buffering anymore. But that should fix it. So This is kind of like Dark Souls, so it's gonna be a challenging game. From what I have seen and what my initial assumptions were, it's not gonna be as hard to play as Lies of P. Lies of P is a game that came out last month. That is another Souls-like of this genre, so it's very challenging gameplay. It's very hard. You basically have to, as they say, get good if you want to actually win or clear the game, because there's no difficulty settings. There's literally just one difficulty setting, and it's like playing a game from start to finish on hard mode. Your typical difficulty level would be normal, but this is like hard mode from the start. And then if you go to New Game Plus turns on like nightmare mode or like very hard mode, essentially. So, oh, you're getting a 7900 XTX and a 7800 X3D. Are you going to be playing games at 1440p or are you going to be playing games at 4K? So let's look at this a little bit. So, Nvidia released their own article, their own GeForce article. It's one of their featured stories. They released this on October 10th. So basically Tuesday. And because tomorrow's Friday the 13th. But the game is launching with DLSS 3 on October 13th, so tomorrow. So we're literally almost there for this game. This is the last game on my list that is the most one of my most anticipated games of the year. But I gotta tell you guys, like, I've been watching a lot of reviews, and yesterday and the day before, I was watching a lot of like kind of preview content, like talking about the different classes, the starting classes, initial impressions, etc., from people who had review copies. And the more I watched that stuff, eventually I had to stop watching it because some of that started getting too spoilery for me. So I just stopped watching the content. But the more I watched content on Lords of the Fallen, the more hyped I got about this game. The more I wanted to play this game. Like, I kid you not, it got to the point where I wanted to play this game so much, it was making me think of this. It created that same sort of sense of urgency or desire to play a game that I have not gotten this year since. The last time this happened to me was the hype building up to the launch of Elden Ring last year. Because I remember when Elden Ring was coming out, like the week or two before, the same sort of content from the content creators started getting uploaded to the internet, and people were talking about like the different classes, and I had the whole list in my head memorized of all the starting classes, and I was trying to think, what is my first playthrough going to be? Am I going to play as a sorcerer? Or am I going to play as a samurai? Like, those were the two that I narrowed it down to from that long list of starting classes. So I broke it all the way down to samurai and I forgot what they call it. I think the sorcerer or the wizard. And I ended up ultimately going with the samurai for Elden Ring on my first playthrough. Because there's nothing like the blind playthrough. The first playthrough through these type of games, these Souls-like games, nothing can compare. For some reason, they're like in all the years that I've played video games, it's these type of games that create that sense of awe, that sense of wonder, because the exploration is so good, but it balances it with a level of challenge. Like the combat, the gameplay is challenging, the boss fights are challenging, the sense of discovery, the sense of exploration, like. The Souls games are like those and the Zelda games are the best in class at doing that kind of content in a video game format. And let me tell you, like, there's nothing like that first blind experience, that first walkthrough through the game where you don't know what to do, you don't know what the soft caps, the hard caps are on the leveling. You don't know the difference between, like, is an enemy resistant to fire magic or is it resistant to holy or frost or whatever. Like, going in blind, there's nothing like going in blind, and that's the reason why I'm so hyped up for this game, going into this game, more so than Lies of P, because Lies of P was, first of all, Lies of P is more like an action game in the sense that you play as a specific character and you're told a specific story, and it's kind of linear, but the level design's still good despite that. The combat's like rock solid in that game, especially after the balance patches. But let me tell you, like, this game with all the build diversity and the starting classes and what to choose and all the choices and all the exploration and the fact that there's covenants and there's multiplayer, there's PvP, there's co-op. It's an online UE5 game. It's kind of like a pioneer in that regard, if you don't count Fortnite. I'm pretty hyped for Lords of the Fallen. Did you play Sekiro? Yes, I played Sekiro. I love Sekiro. Sekiro's combat system was perfection. It was gaming, combat, action gaming at its finest. I've played all of From Software's modern titles. Demon Souls, starting out with Demon Souls on the PS3, Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne. In fact, the reason why I bought a PlayStation 4 was literally to play Bloodborne on launch day of Bloodborne. So, and then Dark Souls 3, then Sekiro, and then Elden Ring. So I've played all of them. And I recently played Armored Core 6. I still haven't beaten Armored Core 6, but I'm fairly close to the end of that game. I'm like at least 75%, 80% of the way through the story on Armored Core. But yeah, I love From Software's games. Miyazaki is a genius when it comes to the overall creating that sense of wonder, that sense of exploration, going through the game world. Let me tell you, it's like there's nothing like going through the world on the first playthrough for those type of games. And Lords of the Fallen, from what I have heard, from a lot of the reviews that I watched earlier, and I read a couple of reviews, the sense of exploration in Lords of the Fallen, they hit the nail on the head with the exploration. And that is the thing that I think propels these type of games to the next level in terms of like what you get out of that first playthrough. So it's like a magical experience. So, there's all these. I'm just reading through your comments. Like RK is saying, "Do you have a micro center?" Yeah. Yeah, haven't seen Nitro Plus XTX in NVC. Okay. Yeah. So it launches. So Nvidia put out their numbers here, and it is just as I expected. And we'll look at them here. I don't know why they don't have like a. That's weird. How come it does that? It like zooms in. Oh, here we go. Okay. So here it is. We're going to look at the lower resolutions, but this is the one that speaks to me because I'm going to be playing the game at 4K. So Lords of the Fallen at 4K native resolution and DLSS 3, although, okay, I guess they're doing, yeah, they must be doing frame generation because it's DLSS 3. And they're also doing upscaling because according to this, it says performance mode. So this is the RTX 40 series because only the 40 series have access to DLSS 3. But what they show here is what I pay attention to is the gray bars because the green bars are misleading because the green bars are showing the performance preset, which is actually pretty bad because the performance preset is going to basically render the game at such a low resolution. I think it renders the game at I don't know if it's 720p. No, it's not 720p. I think it's either 1080p or it's some other resolution that's like between 720p and 1080p. Regardless, this is not a really good showing for the game because this means that the game is going to be very, very hard to run. Because as you can see, an RTX 4090 is only able to do 69 frames per second at 4K native in this title. Now, honestly, that's actually not too bad, considering what we witnessed with Immortals of Avium. Immortals of Avium is a single-player UE5 game, and that game was extremely hard to run at native resolution. So it looks like Lords of the Fallen does a little bit better. Now, what's not talked about in here, in this article, they do not mention the build of the game that they were testing this on, or maybe they do. I don't think they do, though. And what I do know is in talking to some of the reviewers, other YouTubers that got review copies, the game has undergone a lot of patches throughout this week due to feedback and bugs that reviewers found. And some of that is performance updates. So these numbers from NVIDIA might be a little outdated. Why is it showing it like this? What is up with this? Okay. But you can see the RTX 4070 only manages roughly 24 frames per second in 4K resolution native. So realistically, even the 4080 only does 50 in this title. So I don't know why they chose... Actually, I think I understand why they chose performance preset. I think NVIDIA chose performance preset because they... I think it's because they wanted to show the 4070 being able to push above 60 frames per second. So it requires a 4070 to run the game at performance with frame... I'm guessing, yeah, with frame generation, because this is DLSS 3. So with frame gen, the 4070 can do 75, but that's with the performance preset. So the performance preset, I don't know, man. That's not going to look that good, to be honest. You got the... Wait, what? So Met got the 7800X3D for $350 and an Asus B650E for $99. Open box and microcent recent. Oh, wow. Wow, that's really lucky. Yeah. I think the 3D V-Cache might be the ideal CPU for this for these UE5 games, from what I've seen. Okay, let's look at 1440p. 1440p. So at 1440p, this is actually pretty good. These are good results. So 1440p is not going to be insanely hard to run if you have an overkill GPU for 1440p, aka the RTX 4090. It's able to do 125, 126 frames per second at native 1440p. So that's pretty good. With I don't really know why NVIDIA chose performance preset. I really wish they would have shown quality preset, not performance preset, because performance preset is going to make this game look really ugly. But they're showing that a 4060 at performance preset can, with frame generation, can jump from 39 frames per second all the way to 93, we'll call it 94 frames per second. So, yeah, the 4070 Ti is right there at 67, but with frame generation on performance, it can go to like 154. So this tells me that the 4070 Ti can handle this game at ultra preset, or I guess ultra quality, or I guess whatever the max preset is in the game, with DLSS quality preset, and then frame generation turned on. 4070 Ti is probably going to be okay. But anything less than that, like the 4070, these results are kind of questionable, because maybe quality, maybe the 4070 might break around, like it might get to just run around 60. Actually, with frame generation, it could probably do 60. So I think the 40 series are probably going to be okay in this game at their intended resolutions. And then if we go down to 1080p, I don't know why NVIDIA's site shows this. Like, it's so hard for me to find the button here. It's like in the black there. That's so weird. Okay, 1080p. 1080p, the 4060 does do 63 FPS at native 1080p. So that means that the 4060 can do it. So that means the game's not going to be that hard to run as I thought. Like, I originally thought this game was going to be a disaster at launch, because from what I heard, like, I was watching some of the earlier gameplay showcasing from reviewers that were happening last weekend, and what I saw, the performance was kind of all over the place. So it looks like last weekend, the game's performance basically tracked right alongside what Immortals of Avium does in terms of the FPS numbers. But this actually seems like it looks like it's going to do better. So it seems like this game is a little bit more optimized than Immortals of Avium. Considering this is a multiplayer game, that's actually a good thing. Although I have heard that there are a lot of performance issues when you're doing co-op, and there's a lot of like things that are not actually working properly if you try to do PvP in this game. Not just performance issues aside, there's a lot of issues with just like the game not really working properly, from what I heard. But we'll see. That's gonna be that's gonna hurt the game, I think, at least initially. But they're probably gonna fix it with a bunch of patches. I would expect you need at least the 7800 XT or the 6950 XT for 1440 for this game. Yeah, that kind of tracks what we saw in the results. Do you have Ryzen 7000 graphs? Ryzen 7000 graphs? You mean like CPU benchmarks? I don't think anybody's released any CPU benchmarks. As far as I know... Wait, did they do Alan Wake? Oh, they did... Oh, wait, what? They do Diablo? Diablo 4? Who cares? Why is... So they have Alan Wake, but they don't have the results. That's kind of... I don't know. Oh, because the game's not out yet, obviously. Yeah. That's like 2 weeks out. So they'll probably show the Alan Wake results. Yeah, 1440. I think Met's right. That's kind of what I think is needed. Like, I think the 7800 XT is kind of the ideal card for 1440p for this game, because that's like a little bit stronger than a 4070. And keep in mind that FSR 3 is also launching alongside Lords of the Fallen on day one. So I think it should be fine. Like ultra, I keep saying ultra. I mean to say quality preset with frame gen on a 7800 XT is probably the way to go. I don't know. I just don't know how the 7800 XT will do at native 1440. Because the 4070 is a little bit weaker, but I don't think the 7800 XT is that much stronger than a 4070 that it would be able to do 60 consistently at native 1440. I could be wrong, but these results seem to indicate to me that a 7800 XT is probably going to be like just below. It's going to be like 57 FPS, if I had to guess, without knowing. So, at 1440p native. So, you know, you turn on frame generation, and it's probably going to be okay, just like with the 4070. So that's Lords of the Fallen. I am super hyped for this game. Like, you guys have no idea. Like, I really want to play this game. I really wish that this game would launch, like, in 2 hours. I don't understand why Steam, like, for some reason, Steam, for this game in particular, the release day, or the release time, is around, like, 11 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, which is so stupid. Like, why is it not midnight? Or why is it not, like, you know... Yeah, why is it not midnight? Like, it has something to do with Steam. Because the consoles, the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X will get access to this game later this evening, before the PC. So the PC basically gets it last. I do not have RDNA 3 graphs. Yeah, these are NVIDIA's benchmarks. But you can basically take these numbers and you can sort of approximate where the RDNA 3 does. Like, just looking at this, right? Like, the XTX is going to be somewhere around the 4080. So I don't expect the XTX to be able to do 60 at native 4K. I think it's going to be just under 60. Probably around, like, 55, if I had to guess. So that means that the XTX... will have to leverage frame generation or FSR 3 or whatever to do exactly what the 4080 is doing to get up to these higher numbers. So it literally means that the 4090 is the only real 4K option. Like, if you're somebody who completely ignores upscaling and completely ignores frame generation because of the potential to increase latency slightly, ever so slightly, then if you have to play native, then the 4090 is literally the only GPU that can manage to pull it off at 69 frames per second average, which basically means that the 4090 is going to dip below 60 in certain parts of the game, guaranteed. So pretty much no GPU can do 4K native in this game consistently above 60 all the time. So this kind of gives you guys an idea of how next generation games are going to be. And to put things into perspective, I have the console numbers. So the PlayStation 5 offers two modes. There's a visual, I guess what you call the graphics option, and then there's the performance option, which is the 60 FPS mode. So the PlayStation 5 will render this game at either 1440p 30 frames per second or 1080p 60 frames per second. So that means that the PlayStation 5, the once touted 4K console, is now literally just a 1080p console. That shows you how games push technology, or technology and gaming push the hardware forward, because the PS5 is now nothing more than a 1080p console, at least if you're looking for a 60 FPS experience on that console. Now, I don't know how the Series X is going to run the game. I would assume that it's basically going to be the same thing. But Digital Foundry, I'm sure good old Digital Foundry, will have a video showing the consoles. They typically showcase the console performance first, and then they'll do PC second. That's typically how they do it. For some reason, they just do console first. Probably because, I don't know, the majority of the people are probably going to be playing this on console, although I could be wrong. You just need a pretty beefy PC to run this game. Otherwise, you just go get a $500 console and you're playing the game, or I guess a $400 console if you get the digital PS5, and then you're just playing the game at like 1080p 60. So which is fine, because the thing that they never really talk about is the fact that most big screen TV console living room experience, most of that's still heavily 1080p. There's still a lot of people that still only have 1080p big screen TVs. So in that regard, they're not really missing out on anything. They're getting the full 60 hertz, 60 FPS experience on a PS5. So that's good. What I don't know, though, is the degree at which upscaling is required to achieve 1080p 60 or 1440p 30. I assume that there's going to be some degree of upscaling, because if we go back to, let's use 1440p as an example here. So the PlayStation 5 can do 1440p 30 frames per second. So a PlayStation 5 is roughly as fast as an RTX 2080 or a 5700 XT or a 6700 non-XT, to put things into perspective. So that means, think of that like kind of like a 4060. It's kind of like a 4060. It's a little bit, I would say it's a little bit, well, I don't know. It's kind of hard to say because the 4060 is actually very weak. It's kind of like a 4060. Out of everything that's shown on this chart, the 4060 is the closest thing to a PlayStation 5. So, I mean, looking at this, 39 FPS, 1440p native, that means that, like they're saying, 30 FPS, 1440p on PlayStation 5. So that means that maybe it doesn't need to use FSR 2 to hit that 30 FPS target on 1440p. Now, I'm sure that Sony or the PS5 is going to be leveraging dynamic resolution scaling, because these consoles always use dynamic resolution scaling to achieve these FPS targets. I mean, Digital Foundry has proven that time and time again with their various different videos that show that. So maybe there's going to be a little bit of dynamic scaling, but 1440/30, I would not play the game that way on PS5. I would go with the 1080p 60. And if we look at 1080p 60, there you go. Look at that. Check it out. 4060 does 63 FPS on average at 1080p. So this is right in line with the PlayStation 5 in terms of the 60 FPS target. Did you get any deals on the Newegg Amazon or anywhere else? What do you mean? Deals for what? Oh, you mean just like deals in general? I mean, I haven't looked at any. I mean, we could look at them, but I haven't looked at any. Deals for what? For graphics cards? Well, that's Lords of the Fallen. That's all I wanted to say on Lords of the Fallen. I'm very hyped for this game. I want to play the game so badly. I'm just kind of annoyed that there was no early access. But, I mean, considering I only pre-ordered the game yesterday, I mean, whatever. Anyway, let's move on to another article. Just real quick here. I don't have a whole lot to say about AMD on this stream. It's mostly going to be about Intel in the second half of this. But 2024 is to be a big year for AMD in the AI segment. Orders expected from Microsoft and others. So this is nothing really out of the ordinary. This is just business as usual as far as the AI market is concerned, because as everybody who watches my streams already knows, NVIDIA is basically like oversold, overbought on their AI chips. So right now, the market heavily needs, like desperately needs, a second supplier for the AI chips. And AMD with the MI300 is literally the only option. I mean, I think Intel, and then there's some other startup companies out there, but it literally says right here, like, realistically, AMD's AI chip shipments for 2024, mainly the MI300A, will be about 10% of NVIDIA's chips. So basically they're going to try to fill in the gap because there's just not enough NVIDIA chips to go around. This is what happens when you have a single supplier. So AMD is basically going to come in and try to fill up all that missing market share there that NVIDIA literally can't address because they are so supply constrained at this point. So does anybody know what mounting screws he used to sit the AK-20? I literally just used the mounting screws that come with the AK-620. Everything that you need to mount an AK-620 is literally in the box with the AK-620. Like, there's nothing special. You literally just use the screws that it comes with. The installation is in... Well, I assume you're talking about the video build that I did for the 7950X3D. I think you're referring to the video with this CPU. Yeah, so this one, you literally just use the one that comes with the AK-620. You lost your screws? How'd you lose your screws? You just... weren't they just in the box? Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. You're going to need to use the same exact... They have to be the same exact one because they are torqued in a specific manner. They ate them? Sent them with the broken Asus motherboard? Oh, well, yeah, that's not good. So the AI market is... The AI market could potentially negatively impact the consumer GPU market next year. I don't know how much it will, to what extent. I know it could potentially impact the high end. The ultra high end, like the 4090, the XTX, the 40... Well, I don't know about the 4080, but like the biggest dies might end up getting reduced in quantity because they need to sell... I mean, they need to supply more. They need to manufacture more. They already sold them. They just have to manufacture more of the larger dies. Yeah, you can always check with Deepcool to see if they could send some. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it would hurt to ask. The XTX die is smaller than the 4080 die. Yeah, but that's not the point. Like, the point is the wafer allocations. It's all about wafer allocations. If you can only buy, like, think about it like this. If you can only buy 5,000 wafers and you got a lot of angry customers that already, like, you already sold your AI chips to, but now you need to deliver the product to them in a timely fashion and you can't because it's just too backed up. Like, you're gonna have to start canceling your 4090 orders, and you're gonna have to start selling more of your Grace Hopper orders. Like, that's just supply and demand. That's how it works. You're not gonna cancel your small dies. So, like, I guess what Matt's saying is maybe the XTX would not suffer the same supply chain issue that the 4090 could potentially run into next year. Maybe, but probably not. I mean, I think it could still be susceptible because, remember, AMD also has a limited number of wafers that they can get from TSMC. So they're constrained too. It's not like they have an infinite supply. So they're probably going to have to make some hard decisions. It just depends on how much demand there is for the MI300. Now, as far as I know, MI300 is going to be really, really popular, especially with the AI startups that just don't want to pay the NVIDIA pricing, because the NVIDIA pricing and the lead times combined just looks very, how should I put this? It looks very unappealing to a AI startup company if they have to wait a year to get chips. Oh, and by the way, the product is like $40,000 a chip, but it's marked up to like 60,000 or more because supply is so short. Basically, the AI market right now is running into the same problem that the consumer GPU market had 2 years ago when we were struggling with the Ethereum and the crypto and all that stuff. And the thing that I haven't even mentioned that could potentially become a problem a year from now is the return of crypto. I hate to say it because that's like a trigger word that gets a lot of people irritable and, causing people some PTSD talking about cryptocurrency and what it does to the GPU market. But if you examine the crypto waves throughout history, they have this, like, let's call it 28-month window of where they rise and they fall. Just like the business cycle, they rise and they fall. And this time, it's no different. We had the 2014 rise, we had the 2017 rise, we had the 2021 rise. So it always flows like the business cycle. So somebody somewhere is going to invent some crypto thing, next gen crypto, like who knows what they come up with, because remember the guy who came with Ethereum, nobody thought that was going to do anything. Like when crypto went bust back in like 2015, nobody thought anything about it. And then lo and behold, 2017 comes around and bam, someone invents Ethereum and it just takes off. Like nothing can stop like the same sort of thing from happening literally like sometime next year. So I'm just saying, like, I'm sure there's somebody somewhere as I'm speaking talking about crypto and trying to get people and do this thing and invent this coin and build this business case and depending on who you are, tinfoil hat time, trying to scam people into getting on top of this thing and ride this wave and do all this stuff and invest in this and all early retirement funds and all that, whatever. Like, that's going on, like, literally going on right now. Somewhere in the world, someone's coming up with this stuff, and it's going to happen. It's going to come in. We got AI. We have, like, consumer GPU market. And then now all of a sudden, crypto is going to, like, pile on top of that. So can you imagine what would happen, like, in 2025 when we got crypto and AI both competing for the big GPU stuff? Well, no, actually, I take that back. Crypto historically will take all the like energy efficient, best bang for buck, like perf per watt, or I guess hash rate per hour or whatever, like that kind of stuff. So if anybody wanted like a 4070 or a 7800 XT, goodbye. Like those things are gonna be gone, and the 4090 is gonna be gone because of AI and all this other stuff. So That whole thing, that whole chunk of the market, basically like 4070 and 7700 XT and up, that stuff, it's gonna be gobbled up. Crypto's gonna gobble like the 8 and the 7s, and then like AI demand is gonna constrict the flow of like the 90 class cards and the XTX and the 900 cards. So that's what I think is gonna happen. But that assumes that this crypto stuff's gonna rear its ugly head again. Next year will be huge, and I'm accumulating. Oh, you're accumulating. Last cycle, I bought ETH. See, we already got somebody in here talking, preaching the gospel. Super googly, telling everybody now. I mean, it's gonna happen, guys. Like it always happens. People who are gonna like be in denial about it, they're just gonna be the ones that are gonna be complaining on Reddit threads like 2 years from now when you can't buy a GPU anymore because it's like MSI and Asus are selling direct again, like to all the startups that are running the crypto farms. And then like all the other big GPUs, like the 4090, those aren't going to be around because they're going to be gobbled up by the AI guys. So I'm just stating the obvious. It's like, don't shoot the messenger. Not financial advice, but getting some crypto now may fund that 5090 and then some. I mean, it could. See, the thing about Ethereum, though, I don't know about Ethereum, man. Like, I feel like the next big thing that's gonna like create that wave, that to the moon. I don't think that's gonna be Ethereum, though. I'm not convinced that it's Ethereum because ever since Ethereum moved to proof of stake, like there's not really a strong incentive to get on board with it. You know what I'm saying? Like, you had the crypto mining group as kind of the foundation for keeping that going, but and kind of showing the value there because like it was consuming resources to create something of value. Now you don't really have that, so it's kind of weird. I don't know. You're going to keep the MSI for a long time. You're probably going to be stuck with it for a long time. That's more like it, like it's not that you want to keep it, you're just going to be stuck with it. So, yeah, I don't know. Like I feel like 50 series is going to run right into this wave or something like that. Something stupid's going to happen. Just you watch. Like, I've been through too many of these cycles where I can confidently kind of predict when these things will happen. Like I've drawn that map. I've drawn that timeline in Paint multiple times. I don't want to do it again, but I've drawn the crypto waves so everybody knows about the crypto waves. And we're going to be due for one in about a year from now. Give it about a year, fast forward 12 months from now, and there's going to be people talking about crypto and whatever the latest and greatest altcoin is, and Red Panda mining, and all those guys are going to be making all their YouTube videos and getting all those views again. So, it's going to take off again at some point. Someone's going to invent something that's going to get enough buy-in, enough hype, and it's just going to market itself up the chain and get everybody to invest in it, and that's just how it's going to be. So, anyway, I did not expect to talk about crypto, but since you were talking so much about GPUs in regards to like Lords of the Fallen, yeah, I mean that's all I had to say on that. The other thing here, I guess the only other major news article worth talking about. Well, there's two things. There's the Threadripper, which I think is here. Yeah, Threadripper, and then there's the Intel. So Intel, let's talk about Intel now. Or actually, no, let's talk about Threadripper first, and then we'll come back to Intel. Because I think I want to spend a little bit more time talking about Intel, because the Threadripper Pro is literally so expensive that all I need to do is talk about it and then never really talk about it again because it's just too expensive. So anyway, Stormpeak apparently is actually coming to the prosumer market. So up to 96 Zen 4 cores at 5.35 gigahertz. That's crazy to think about. 96. I think this is literally probably like some kind of low thread, like maybe 10% of the threads can run at this speed. I don't think you can do 96 cores at 5.3. That sounds insane if that's true. If it's like full, if that's full core, which I highly doubt, full load, that would be insane. So flagship, the Pro 7995WX remains consistent with prior reports, boosting 96 cores with a 350 watt TDP. Okay, so it's only 50. That's crazy though. Like, it's 50 watts more than the 13900K, because 13900K does up to 300 watts when you're running it on a default Z790 BIOS or a Z790 board will push unlimited power mode, and the 13900K, I mean, I've tested it. I mean, I've literally got one, guys, like literally right here. So this thing does 300 watts at full load, unlimited power mode on a Gigabyte Z790 Aorus Master. So Threadripper, 96 cores doing just 50 watts more for 96 cores. I mean, that's pretty good. That's pretty impressive, actually. Base clock of 2.5. I think this is more realistically the... this is probably the full... This is the speed for all 96 cores at 100% load. I do not think you can do 5.1. It says boost clock, so this is probably like the low thread, which are the lowest frequencies of the entire lineup. Moreover, well, obviously, the more cores you have, the lower the base clock will be, because the base clock is always your worst case scenario. So when you have so many cores and you're constrained to a 350 watt TDP, you have to divide that power budget across all 96 cores. So hence the reason why the base clock ends up going lower and lower the more cores you add. Moreover, this part exclusively supports 128 PCIe Gen 5 lanes. This right here, this is the difference between a man and a boy. Okay? This is 128 PCIe Gen 5. Do you guys know how many PCIe Gen 5 lanes the Zen 4 consumer CPUs have? You guys, people who watched my motherboard in-depth deep dive videos on the X670E and the B650E, how many, I mean, Met just got a B650E motherboard. How many Gen 5 lanes are on a consumer AMD motherboard? Let's see if you guys remember. It's pop quiz time for the stream. For the chat. I'm sure somebody's going to Google the answer. I'm sure they're not going to be able to find it that easily. RK says 32. Oh, he's saying when's that releasing? This is releasing supposed to be this month. I don't know when, though. Alright, well, I guess nobody really knows the answer. Trying answers, typing answers. Okay, anybody else? Anybody else, or does everybody think that it's 32? Carlos says 10. Sid says 44. Okay. I can't tell if you guys asked. Hades says 28. Okay. Okay, that's interesting. So, man, Hades always seems to be like either 100% correct or correct in like the weird way where it's like it's debatable. So the correct answer, the answer that I was looking for was 24. 24 lanes of PCIe Gen 5 for the consumer desktop board. Now Hades is actually, technically speaking, there's 28 lanes. However, on the current chipset, so the B650E and the X670E, I'm not talking about the non-E, because the non-E only has 4 lanes that are actually running at Gen 5. Everything else is Gen 4. But for the E chipsets, they have 28 total. However, 4 of them are connected to the chipset itself, and they're only negotiated at Gen 4 speeds. So now let's bring out Paint. This is probably some of my viewers' favorite part of the stream is when I bring out Paint. So just to kind of reiterate this, just to show people again, it's been a while since we've looked at the chipset. But remember that you have the 5.0 bus here, PCIe 5.0 X24. So this is the answer that I was looking for. You have 24 usable lanes, and then down here, you're downlinked to the actual motherboard for the chipset. This is PCIe 5.0. So Hades is actually correct. The total would be 28. However, the problem is the reality is that the South Bridge, or what used to be known as South Bridge, this is the Promontory 21, aka B650 chipset, only runs at Gen 4 speed, which means that down here it is running PCIe 4.0 X4. So the CPU is able to talk or negotiate up to Gen 5. However, the motherboard only does Gen 4. So the reality is when you have 5 on one side and 4 on the other side, it will always go with the lowest common denominator. So the reality is this bus between the CPU and the motherboard is only 4 lanes of Gen 4 bandwidth. So the correct answer that I was looking for, so Hades technically is correct in saying 28, but the reality is it's not 28 usable lanes. It's only 24 usable lanes. So that was the answer I was looking for. So 24 compared to Threadripper with 128 usable lanes. So that shows you the difference between a Threadripper platform and a regular, run-of-the-mill, peasant level AMD Ryzen 9 7950 X3D. And Intel also is in the same boat because Intel doesn't even have that many. Intel has even less. How many PCIe Gen 5 lanes does the Z790 platform offer? Now let's see if you guys can get this answer correct. So 24 for AM5. How many Gen 5 lanes does Intel's 13, 14, and 12th gen offer? So Z690 and Z790 and Z790 Max, all 3 of them have the exact same answer because they're all based off of the platform. We're not talking about DMI lanes, we're talking about PCIe lanes. Hades says 16, man. Marcelo said 14. Man, somebody is either a motherboard enthusiast, or they just did their homework, or they just have some really good, or they just remember my videos. So for LGA 1700, the correct answer for PCIe Gen 5 on Intel is, drumroll, 16 lanes. So Hades got it right. 16 lanes of Gen 5 on Intel's consumer desktop platform. So AMD has 24, Intel has 16. Now, Psycho did mention the DMI. Now, the DMI is 8 lanes of Gen 4, but it's not. Yeah, the DMI is equal to Gen 4, though. Keep that in mind. So that's not a PCIe lane. It's not a usable lane. Because remember, we're talking about usable lanes. What can you connect that can leverage PCIe Gen 5 bandwidth? So I'm not talking about the downstream. So some people are citing the chipset, which is okay, but remember, when we're talking about the chipset, we're not talking about PCIe Gen 5 because the chipset doesn't do PCIe, or I guess it doesn't do Gen 5. This is DMI 4.0 X8 lanes. Less of a bottleneck between chipset and CPU. Yeah, you're right. The thing is, though, Psycho, the thing to keep in mind is that you're right. You have more bandwidth between Intel's CPU and the chipset itself, and that explains why Intel prefers to connect everything through the chipset. The difference between Intel and AMD in their CPU architecture is that AMD allows connecting USB directly to the CPU, completely bypassing the chipset. So the way I see it, AM5, the AM5 socket itself is more like it's more like it's a collapsed architecture in the sense that you got the hub on the actual socket versus on Intel, everything is literally going through the platform controller hub, the PCH, which is basically the Z790 chipset. So yeah. The thing about AMD is you can actually have USB connecting straight into the actual chips, the CPU, I should say, the socket. So you've got like USB going in here, like USB 3.2 Gen 2x1 or whatever I always get confused when I start talking about USB. But you guys get the idea. AMD allows for USB ports to go straight into the CPU, in addition to having them on the chipset as well. Whereas Intel has everything going through the chipset, so you would want Intel to have more bandwidth between the chipset and the CPU because everything is going through the chipset. There are no USB ports that go through the CPU, and there are no NVMe drives except for one that goes to the CPU. All the NVMe, all your storage, your SATA, your NVMe, your USB, your onboard audio, you name it, all that stuff, it goes through the chipset on the Intel motherboard. Whereas on AMD, you have kind of a mix. You've got lanes on the CPU that go straight to USB, straight to storage, because AMD has NVMe straight into the CPU. They even can, in some cases, they can give you dedicated lanes. It's very open-ended. It's up to the motherboard manufacturer to decide like how they want to use those CPU lanes. So that's why I find the AMD platform itself more versatile than the Intel one. It's not like you can't do things on the Intel one that you can do on the AMD. At the end of the day, they achieve the same thing. They both have things like USB 4. They both have things like 20 gig USB, 10 gig USB, etc. All that kind of stuff. So, but what we're doing here is we're kind of showing the difference between Threadripper and a regular consumer desktop. So, Threadripper, I guess what I'll say here to kind of close out this discussion point, Threadripper equals 128 PCIe 5, which is greater than Ryzen 7000 with only 24, or I guess Ryzen equal 24 PCIe 5, which is greater than Intel with its 16. Intel equals 16. I wish there was a better way for me to write this, but anyway, you guys get the idea. This is the reason why Threadripper costs so much money. Because a lot of people sometimes wonder, like, why is Threadripper so expensive? Why are the motherboards on Threadripper so expensive? Well, two things. Obviously, the core count is insane, up to 96 cores. But even if you wanted to buy just a 24-core Threadripper or a 16-core Threadripper, here's the thing. If somebody wanted a workstation desktop to do like a lot of things other than just virtual machines, they could go with a Threadripper system, like a Threadripper 16 core or a Threadripper 24 core or maybe a 32 core, and they could still get the exact same motherboards that are supporting the way more expensive 64 core, 96 core, etc. So if you don't need all those cores, you can get like a 24 core or a 16 core Threadripper, and obviously they have SMT, so like a A 16 core is a 32 thread. So a 32 thread CPU, and you're still getting the full 128 lanes. So you're basically never going to be bottlenecked on storage, on the throughput and bandwidth between the chipset and the CPU. If you're somebody who's running like a lot of drives, like if you have scratch drives for editing 8K and 4K, 5K, 6K footage, for example, that is where Threadripper makes the difference between a regular or compared to a regular consumer desktop. So these are the sort of things that, like in the enthusiast crowd, like a lot of times we talk about, high-end graphics cards, high-end motherboards, CPUs, RAM, etc. We don't really talk about the platform itself. I think that's really not really talked a lot on like various like tech channels in general. But the platform actually can make a big difference if you have a high-end platform with a lot of lanes, because it means that your PC literally becomes, it can basically do whatever you want. If you want to run a lot of virtual machines, you can do that. If you want to run a lot of like storage, you can do it. A lot of memory channels, you can do it. Threadripper also has 8-channel memory. 8-channel memory. Think about that. You know how many channels of memory Intel and Ryzen have? They only have 2 channels of memory, guys. It's dual channel. You have your A channel and you have your B channel. Threadripper has your A channel, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H channel. You get 8 channels with Threadripper. In fact, the thing that Threadripper Pro could technically do, it can technically do up to 12 channels of memory. But AMD has to segment the difference between a Threadripper motherboard and a EPYC motherboard. The EPYC motherboard does 12-channel memory. The Threadripper motherboard does 8-channel memory. That's one way that they differentiate a Threadripper from an EPYC. So how does W790 compare to the upcoming Threadripper? W790 is similar to Threadripper. I don't know if it has as many lanes. I think it has a few less. It might be the same or it might be less. It definitely doesn't have more, and it doesn't have as many cores. But in terms of the platform, though, it's very similar. To answer your question on the platform itself, because you asked about W790, not about the actual CPU. Core count, Threadripper has more. But in terms of the connectivity, I think they're very similar. So it's ultimately going to come down to how the motherboard manufacturer decides to make use of all those lanes. Are they just going to give you a bunch of, like X16 PCIe slots, or are they going to do a lot of NVMe add-in cards, etc. for, like RAID for redundancy on your NVMe and those kind of things? Although we're seeing less and less of that, but it could be something that a content creator in like the professional world would want to leverage, or maybe they want to do a bunch of like AI stuff. Threadripper is excellent with AI on a budget, because think about how many GPUs you can connect into that motherboard and not be bottlenecked at all. Like you could literally run the model with the full X16 on all those GPUs. So there's a lot of things. What I'm saying is, I think everybody here gets the idea, is Threadripper allows you to be unconstrained in terms of what you need the computer to do. Whereas with the consumer desktop, you have so few lanes at the end of the day that like think about it. You can't have more than like 4 NVMe drives. Like you can't have more than like 4 or 6 SATA ports. Although those are becoming less and less relevant. And then you can only really have like 1 GPU. I mean, you could plug in a second GPU, but it's only going to run at like X8 at best. And then your primary is also running at X8. So there's a lot of like lane sharing. There's a lot of compromises that are made when you use a consumer desktop motherboard versus an actual professional workstation motherboard, which is what the Threadripper system is. So I hope that kind of like summarizes that. But that's Threadripper. It's coming out supposedly this quarter, so it should be soon. they're saying October, but realistically, this sort of platform, I don't think a lot of people are gonna be able to afford it. To be honest, like I can't afford this thing. Like it's just too expensive. But it's insane. Like it's a powerhouse. It's a workhorse. It is for the professional. You know, like hands down, you can't really beat this platform for productivity. Like there's nothing better than this, unless you want to just literally buy a server, and that's like literally thousands of dollars at that point. And for what? You know, like just so you spent more money on a computer than like buying a Mac Pro or something. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on Threadripper. So cool, it's awesome. It's like the pinnacle of like desktop PCs uh, that exist today. And I mean, Intel has something in the works. Like Sapphire Rapids was kind of a big flop, but because of the power consumption, that was really the main concern that most of the OEMs had with it. But I think Emerald Rapids is going to address that. So Emerald Rapids next year should be more competitive with Threadripper in the prosumer professional market. You ran into that with the X670E, consolidated for 2 terabyte down to 3, so the GPU could run an X16. Oh, you have a motherboard that does that? Most X670E motherboards don't share lanes like that. There's a few that do though, but the ones that I have don't do that. Like I'm literally running 4 NVMe drives right now on the Aorus Master, and my GPU is at full X16 while running that many NVMe drives. So it depends on your board. What motherboard do you have? Well, now I'm curious. Carbon. Oh no, that's Sid. Sid got the Carbon. Oh yeah, I think I remember you mentioning that. That's a good board. I'm curious what Psycho has though, because the only ones that I can think of that share lanes are, I know the Gigabyte Extreme does, and I think I'm trying to remember if there was like an ASRock board that did it too. Oh, the E-E shares lanes? I didn't think the Asus E-E shared lanes. I know the Asus motherboard, the reason why I didn't like the X670E-E, that's the Strix. The reason why I did not like that motherboard is because they aren't actually using all the lanes. I think if I remember correctly, there are 2 lanes. There are 2 lanes of Gen 4 or Gen 3, I think it's Gen 4, that they're literally not connecting. They're literally wasting chipset lanes on that motherboard. And that's the reason why I don't recommend it. Like if somebody wanted to go Asus and they want to get like a prosumer motherboard, the only one that I would recommend, if not the Creator, I would recommend the Crosshair. I know it's expensive because it's a $700 motherboard, but that's really the one that I would recommend. The Crosshair Hero is, because I know RK has a Crosshair Hero, and that's a really good one for overclocking. But I would recommend somebody who wants to build a professional system. I would recommend the X670E Hero from Asus. If you really want like uncompromised lanes, because the problem is the Hero, the top slot or the second PCIe slot shares lanes with the graphics card. So if you want the uncompromised one, you got to get the Extreme. Like this one, this is the best Asus motherboard. Like this is actually this is the most expensive while still being the most useful motherboard at $1,000. The MSI Godlike costs more than this, but it doesn't give you anything more than this. In fact, the Asus Extreme actually gives you more functionality than the MSI Godlike, while being $300 cheaper, which is insane. Like to say $1,000 is more affordable while giving you more functionality than a $1,300 Godlike. That's basically like comparing an XTX to a 4080. Yeah, but this is the one because this is the magical motherboard. I talked about it a few weeks ago. So those who like watch that stream, they already this is gonna sound like redundant, but you get X16 Gen 5, you get an X8, which you won't really use because it steals lanes from the GPU. However, this bottom slot is the magic X4. This is an X4. So that X4 is a kind of a must-have on a motherboard these days. You like how we always loop back to this motherboard? Yeah, because it's the one that does everything. Like, this is the one motherboard that literally does everything and doesn't do anything, like, it's not missing anything. Like, you name it, it's got it. It has RGB. It has, like, you can do animated GIFs on the LED screen there, on the I/O. So it's got all the RGB. So it check marks RGB. It check marks USB 4 and Thunderbolt 4. It has all that stuff built in, so you don't need an add-in card. That means you can still leverage your X4 slot for like a 4K 60 capture card, for example, from AverMedia, because that's exactly what I would plug in there. You thought the ITX Gene was better to overclock? If you're talking about overclocking, then yes, there are better options. There's certainly more affordable options. But this is the motherboard that you can overclock on the Extreme just fine. It's very good. It has your debug post code up here in the top right. So you've got your little memory training code thing. You've got your start button. You've got your reset button, whatever, all the stuff, slow boot. You even have an LCD screen on your NVMe Gen 5 heatsink that says Extreme on it. That actually lights up. You have an RGB Gen 5 heatsink. Think about that. You know, and the South Bridge, the chipset has an LED screen too. That's kind of insane. So, hence why it's $1,000. Hence this motherboard costs as much as an XTX. Think about it. This motherboard costs the same, just the motherboard, CPU and memory sold separately. Think about that. Just the motherboard costs as much money as an AMD flagship GPU. The best GPU that AMD offers, Asus motherboard, costs the exact same amount. That's crazy. This thing costs more than a 4070 Ti. And it costs more money than a 7900 XT. And you still have to buy the CPU and the DDR5 memory. Unless you live near a micro center and you can get free DDR5. You know, so yeah, this is the one that has everything, you know, but it's just kind of like $1,000 on a motherboard, and I don't know. Not 2 DIMM slots? Well, the thing with 4 DIMM slots, though, like, you just don't use the other 2. See, the thing, I don't understand, like, I get why people like the 2 DIMM motherboards, because, yeah, you can hit 8,000 on the memory, like, way more consistently with a 2 DIMM motherboard. However, you're going to be limited to 96 gigabytes of memory, at least for now. Like, that's the most you can do on those motherboards. Why is the GPU slot so low? It's actually not that low. It's just underneath the Gen 5 SSD. So, yeah, you got your top GPU slot goes there. And Asus actually did it the same way Gigabyte did. Like, they put the graphics card, and then there's 1, 2, 3. There's three slots between. So you can fit a 4-slot GPU here, like a massive XTX, or like you can fit a Nitro, a Sapphire Nitro XTX, or any of the 4090s could all fit between this PCIe slot and the second PCIe slot. You'd have no problem connecting something in there if you wanted. So that's the other thing too. This GPU, this GPU, it's as much money as a GPU. This motherboard, like I said earlier, it literally checks it's the no compromise motherboard. Like, if you want to use all your PCIe slots, including plugging in a 4090 or an XTX, you can do that with this motherboard. It is the no compromise motherboard. You want to run an external Thunderbolt based capture card on the back of the motherboard? You can do that with this motherboard. It supports full Thunderbolt 4 protocol with PCIe tunneling. Not a lot of AMD motherboards do that, but this motherboard can do it. How much is it? It costs $1,000. I said it earlier, Beatles. It costs the same amount of money as an 7900 XTX. You heard great things about the ASRock B650 live mixer to get the most out of X3D. But looks are meh and is bare bones. Well, it's bare bones because it's a B650 motherboard. No, that's a good motherboard, actually. That's a really good board. Like, and the thing is, that motherboard doesn't cost that much money either. Like, we're talking about a $1,000 motherboard. Maybe we should talk about, like, a more affordable motherboard. Because this is clearly not for everybody. This is not for me. Like, I'm not gonna buy this. Like, this is just way too much money for a motherboard. XTX is less than... Yeah, I know, right? Like technically, this is more expensive than an XTX now. So when your motherboard costs more money than your graphics card, and we're not talking about a cheap run-of-the-mill graphics card, then you have problems. Then there are some problems with the PC market. So that's what I call the ASUS tax. Because the reason why I call it the ASUS tax is because you can get a similar motherboard with almost the exact same functionality for much cheaper than this. And that motherboard is the ASRock X670E Taichi. The Taichi does almost everything that the Asus Extreme does at half the price. So whereas this is a $1,000 motherboard, the ASRock Taichi is a $500 motherboard that basically has everything that the Asus motherboard has, except one thing. There's one thing that it's missing. That is the fatal flaw. That is the Achilles heel of this motherboard. And this might not be a deal breaker for most people, but it is a deal breaker for anyone who is a content creator. Well, okay, let me rephrase that, because not every content creator is going to need to do this. But if you're somebody who wants a no-compromise PC that allows you to run a capture card internally, this motherboard is not for you. Because this motherboard only has 2 PCIe slots. No, Hades, it does have Thunderbolt. This does have Thunderbolt. The only thing this thing is missing is the magical X4 PCIe slot. So if you go back to the Asus one, notice down here, Asus has that magical X4. I wish they had a physical X16 slot, even though it's only 4 lanes. I would rather have a full X16 physical with an X4 electrical versus an X4 physical and X4 electrical. Because if I need to plug in, like, for example, I'll give you guys an example. If I want to plug in an Intel Arc A380 as a cheap AV1 encoder, I would prefer to plug that in down here so that it doesn't steal half of my primary GPU's lanes. However, with this motherboard, I can't do that. So that is the one flaw with the Extreme. But at least it gives you that magical third PCIe slot, whereas the Taichi doesn't have it. It only gives you the X16 for the top, and then it gives you an X8, which shares lanes. It basically peels off half of the top slot's lanes if you want to plug something in down here. So that is the fatal flaw of the Taichi. But remember, it's half the cost of the Extreme. And it still has Thunderbolt. You can still run a 4K 60 external Thunderbolt-based capture card or any Thunderbolt peripheral off of this motherboard, because it has the full Thunderbolt chipset included for USB 4 and Thunderbolt 4. So basically it has everything except the magic X4 slot. And Honestly, I would have gotten this motherboard if it had an X4 dedicated slot. But because it didn't have it, that was the deal breaker for me. But that's only me. I mean, everybody's different. All the use cases are going to depend on the user at the end of the day. But this is a pretty good motherboard from what I have, just from analyzing all the stuff that it comes with. And I don't really have any problem with ASRock. I know some people think of ASRock as kind of the budget brand. There's nothing wrong with ASRock, to be honest. Like, I'm using a Steel Legend. I did a Steel Legend build, and it works totally fine. Like, I have no problems with it. It was the first... ASRock was actually the first motherboard brand that released the Agisa 1007B, which allowed the fast Gear 2 memory speeds, so like 6400 and above. All of those were first available on ASRock. You know, like Tai Chi and Steel Legend and the Phantom Gaming, all those boards, and the Riptide, they all got it like 2 weeks before Asus, MSI, and Gigabyte rolled their BIOS out. So, yeah, those memory videos that I did them on ASRock because they were, like, I did them before everybody else could do them because ASRock was the first one that had them. So the Tai Chi is a good one if you need USB 4. And if you're never really going to use a dedicated X4 slot. So that's like the only thing. That's the thing about motherboards, though. Like, a lot of people talk about VRMs, VRM quality, and the heat sinks. The reality, if you're on an AMD platform, you don't need to worry too much about the VRM quality because the AMD CPUs don't actually use that much power. So almost all of these, like $300 and above motherboards are way overkill on the VRM for these AMD CPUs. They just don't use that much power, you know, like, so the VRM doesn't really matter that much. So that kind of leaves it to the PCIe layout. Like, do you want 4 sticks of RAM versus like 2, or do you want like 4 DIMM slots versus 2? Do you need USB 4? You know, like all that kind of stuff. Do you want all that Gen 5? Do you need a certain number of SATA ports, etc.? That's basically what I think of when I'm considering what motherboard to buy. I don't really care, like, what's the VRM, because the VRMs are all pretty much the same at the end of the day. They're not. It's not like the Extreme has a significantly better VRM than the Tai Chi that it's going to outperform it, because at the end of the day, the if you have a golden sample chip, that's going to matter way more than the VRM. Also, no major problems from ASRock this generation. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, ASRock... At launch, ASRock did have the sleep bug issue, but they fixed that, I think, within the first 2 to 3 weeks that Zen 4 was out. But other than that, like, everything, yeah. They haven't had any major problems, like, throughout the launch of the X3D CPUs. They were good. They were usually always the first one, or one of the first ones with the latest BIOS that fixed a lot of things. So yeah, ASRock has been pretty good this generation. And I mean, that's the same with the Intel boards too. Like, on Intel, ASRock's pretty good. Like, on both. ASRock has really been pretty solid, to be honest, like, over the last couple of generations. You heard the same about VRM or crazy AIOs because AMD is so... Yeah, like, you don't need to worry too much about your VRM quality if you're on an AMD platform. Because that's another thing. Like, some of the comments that I got on my tier list video were like, you didn't consider the VRM when you did your tier list. That's because the VRM doesn't really matter, guys. Like, the people who watch the X670 tier list, like, most of them, by and large, the vast majority of people who watched the video and left comments on the video, they understood what the comparison was about. You know, like, it's all about, like, how much does the motherboard allow you to do for the cheapest price? You know, like, that's kind of what it's about. Like, value for money. That's how I rank the motherboards. I don't rank the motherboards based off of the VRM. Like, because I'm pretty sure, like, you take these apart, anything that's over $350, it's going to have a good VRM. Like, they're not going to have a cheap VRM on a $500 motherboard. See, so you can make some rational assumptions there that are going to carry over to a lot of the different brands. The 7800X3D is like the most bought AM5. Yeah, yeah, because I mean it's a single CCD. Single CCD, it doesn't have the same heating problems that the other ones do. Because the thing with the X3D, so the X3D, so this one right here is the 7950 X3D. The 7950 X3D doesn't get as hot as the standard one. So I have the X3D here, and then I also have the standard 7950X. And what I can tell you guys is the X3D, this one, if you run this on an air cooler, I'm running this on an AK620 air cooler from Deepcool. The hottest this will ever go is like 89 degrees. And think about that. That is a full 100% max tune, like all out to the max, 89 Celsius at stock without any sort of tweaking, without nothing. You just go all out, 100% Cinebench run. It goes up to 89 Celsius. So that's actually not that bad. The difference between that and this, the 7950X will go to 95 Celsius with the exact same cooler, whereas the X3D won't do that. By comparison, the 13900K, you put this thing with a air cooler AK620, this thing immediately shoots up to 100 degrees Celsius in thermal throttles. I have a video on YouTube showcasing how it behaves when you do a, I think I did like a DaVinci Resolve render, and I think I also did Cinebench runs. And with an air cooler, this thing goes to 100 Celsius and thermal throttles instantly at stock. So, and that's stock. That isn't even doing anything. Like, that's stock. No overclocking, nothing. So, out of the box, thermal throttling, 100 degrees on an air cooler. To me, that is unacceptable. I should not have to sand down my CPU or order something from Der Bauer to, like, radically drop my temperature. Like, I shouldn't have to do that. You know, as a regular consumer, even though I'm an enthusiast, even though I could technically do all of those things if I wanted to, I could sand down, I could lap the 13900K IHS, I could drop the temps on it dramatically by doing those modifications, but I should not have to do that as a consumer. And the average Joe is totally not okay with doing that, you know? So the fact that it does that on an air cooler, and we're not talking about some like cheap air cooler, we're talking about like a AK620 or a Noctua NHD15, they basically do the exact same thing. The thing overheats to 100 at 100 degrees instantly when you're doing the Cinebench run at thermal throttles. So that means that you're basically compromising on performance, and even if you run an AIO, you could potentially get a little bit better on the thermals, but not really. You basically have to go full custom loop, and it's like, I don't really want to do that because I swap out my hardware so often. I don't want to be taking apart my custom loop all the time. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I like to run the air cooler. The other thing too, air cooler, so low maintenance. I don't have to worry about the pump failing. I don't have to worry about leaks. I don't have to worry about anything. You just stick that air cooler on there and that's it. You set it and forget it. Life is good. It's so simple and it works. So the fact that I can't really, like, I have to actually power limit and basically lose a lot of multi-thread performance because I'm running on an air cooler. So I'm not too happy about that with the 1300K. And honestly, that's the reason why this is not the main system that I do the benchmarks with. So Marcel's saying moving to Antarctica is cheaper. Yeah, but I heard that the internet speeds in Antarctica aren't really that good. You know? You're right, that would fix the problem. Going to Antarctica, I mean, I'm pretty sure, like, Antarctica has so much cool temperatures that you don't need to worry about, like, thermal throttling in Antarctica. But the problem is that you don't have internet access and all this other stuff, so it creates a lot of other issues there. So anyway, RK has big air coolers. Which ones? I know you had like a Be Quiet and You had the Noctua at one point. You didn't like the fans. Did you get the deep cool? Did you get the deep cool? The AK 620? So a $800 EK block for the i9 is a bad investment. That I mean it depends on you, man. Like you do you. I personally wouldn't buy an $800 EK block for the i9, but you do you. It certainly will. It'll be far more capable of handling that 100-degree thermal throttling issue compared to the big air cooler. You have big air coolers. You hate big air coolers. Well, see, the only thing about big air coolers that's a nuisance is if you have to swap out RAM or if you have to. Basically, from my experience, the only issue that I run into with big air coolers is adding or swapping RAM. But realistically, it's not that bad. You have to remove the front fan, assuming you run the front fan on the air cooler, and then you got to get behind it, and then you have to get the RAM. And the RAM slot that's the closest to the CPU socket that's the most annoying one, because that one is. You kind of have to get it at a weird angle. I think I showed it in the build video that I did. Alaska or Canada are the coldest climates that you could live in. They still have decent internet and other things. Yeah, so I guess Alaska in the middle of winter where it's dark all the time or it's like barely daylight, that might be a good environment for a 13900K with an air cooler. Because your ambients are so low that you're probably not going to hit thermal throttle on an air cooler. Edit stream settings, customization, turn off live reactions. Wait, what? Oh, the heart thing? You don't like the heart thing? People are going to start spamming the thing. You said edit stream. Where do I'm trying to look for that thing. Edit stream. I knew it. People are going to start spamming the thing. Customization. People are going to keep spamming that until I turn that off now. Live reactions. Yeah, I know. I turned it off. Hey, it went away. Okay. You know what? That does get in the way sometimes for me as well. Yeah, that does get in the way for me. Okay. Thanks for telling me how to do that. I didn't even know where that setting was. That was something that I tried to look for like a long time ago, and I eventually just gave up. I think I was looking in the wrong space, because on YouTube, there's like two different places to edit the stream settings. There's stream settings edit, and there's an edit button. And apparently it's under the edit button, not under the stream settings tab, which is interesting. So I think what I was doing wrong when I was searching for that was I was looking under stream settings. And it's actually under the edit button, not the stream settings. So that's good to know. Okay, well, the heart thing's finally gone. Like I've been trying to figure out how to get rid of that thing for months, and I just gave up after a while. So, all YouTube needs to do is they need to move the button, move it away from the actual like the window where the chat is, and then it wouldn't be a problem. Then I'd turn it back on, but because it covers up, it obscures the most recent message all the time. So that's why I prefer not to have it on. Do you think the 14th gen will truly hit 6 gigahertz at a lower TDP? How would they achieve it? So here's what the 14th... We have an article on that. Where is it? Here it is. Okay, here we go. Let's talk about Raptor Lake. We've been talking a lot about AMD, even though nothing new from AMD until next year, at least the consumer desktop piece. So Intel unintentionally revealed... The thing is, who cares if it's unintentional? It's like everybody already knows this stuff exists. Like, this is something that everybody knew about, regardless of whether Intel publicly or privately leaked it by accident or on purpose. So, there are some revisions compared to the 13th generation. And you can see here what they've done. So if we look at the LGA 1700 transporting tray update, so they have made some changes to the plastic tray that the CPU is in the actual box packaging. So this is the first thing that was changed. So the plastic that covers the CPU. Let me see. Do I actually have one in here? Open this thing up again. Oh, this thing just like falls apart completely when I open it up. Uh-oh, that was not a good idea. So let me see. Okay, here it is. I found it. Okay, so they're talking about this plastic thing. This retaining plastic thing from Intel has undergone some revisions in terms of the pocketing. So they've reshaped the plastic. This is the revision. This is the first thing that's different between the 13th generation and the 14th generation. So you can see they have these little pockets here in the corner. So there's one here, there's one down there, there's one over here, and there's one down here. So they change the shape slightly, and there's like a little thing in the middle there that kind of sticks up. So I don't know. So the trays are going to be a little bit different. The CPU trays will start shipping on October 25th, but I don't know if that's... Wait, what? I heard that these things are going to be on sale next week. So now this article is sort of indicating October 25th. My understanding is that the launch day for 14th generation was the 17th, which is next Tuesday. That's when I expect all the reviews from like Gamers Nexus and all those guys to come out with the 14th generation. So let's see. So we've got, here's the entire list. So you go all the way up from an Intel processor 300, a 300T, an i3 14100T, and so forth and so on, all the way up to the 14900KF. And my understanding is that the 14900K is a slightly tweaked 13900KS. So that is one thing. That's for the i9. And the 14600K is basically a rebadged 13600K. Now, the only one that is actually different is the 14700K. 14700K is actually going to include an additional set of 4 efficiency cores. So the 14700K is actually going to be physically different from the 13700K. Everything else on this chart is basically identical to the 13 equivalent. So only the i7. Only the i7 will be different. And in that regard, the i7 will be the one that you can expect every single reviewer to spend the vast majority of time on, because that's the only one really worth talking about, because everything else is a rebadge of the previous iteration. So it's worth mentioning that there's only one missing SKU, and that's the KS version of the i9, or the i9 14900KS. This CPU is not anticipated until next year, as Intel typically requires time to accumulate enough pre-binned chips for the launch of a new SKU with enhanced frequency support. Anything worth upgrading here from a 13700K? Well, the only thing that's different, like I just said, and maybe the stream delay hasn't caught up, but the 14700K does give you 4 additional E-cores versus the 13700K. So in some rare scenarios, with Windows 11 in particular, I must stress Windows 11 because if you're on Windows 10, you do not have Thread Director able to talk. Like Thread Director can't talk to Windows 10, so there's no handshake between the two of them. There's no signaling between the two of them. So Windows 10 is designed to basically prioritize workloads, or it prioritizes cores based off of the maximum frequency that the core is capable of doing. So what that means is that in most scenarios, the Windows operating system, Windows 10, will be sufficient enough on its own to delegate work to the Intel P and E cores without too much trouble. However, occasionally it will mess up and it will give an E-core something like a game task or whatever that needs to actually run on a P-core, and it will mess it up, and it'll result in micro dips or whatever if you're talking like FPS, because think about it, you're going from like 5.5 gigahertz on a P-core for that same thread. You're dropping all the way down to like 4.3 max on an E-core. That's assuming the E-core is running at max speed for that task. And depending on how heavy, like what type of instruction that task is doing, like is it an SSE2, is it an AVX instruction or whatever, like depending on what it is, that's going to dictate like how fast or slow the actual frequency is for that thread. So you get stuck with this running on an E-core and you run into like performance regression with Windows 10. That is the reason why, if anybody is on Intel, I highly, highly recommend, if you're not on Windows 11, that you do, and you're not on Linux, assuming you're not running Linux, that you upgrade to Windows 11. Like, you should not be running one of these CPUs with Windows 10 because you're actually missing out on certain aspects of performance with that CPU. So having said all of that, I am still on Windows 10, but I'm actually really close to pulling the trigger and actually migrating my entire workflow, everything to Windows 11. I'm probably going to do that at the end of the year, just because Windows 10 is slowly, like the sun's setting on Windows 10. So I might want to move before they drop support, but I think there's still going to be extended maintenance support for the next 2 years or so. So if I wanted to stay on Windows 10, I could. But I am missing out on a more consistent experience, at least on the 13 and I guess the 14th generation, on my Intel system. My AMD system, it doesn't really care. Like, it does fine on on Windows 10 or 11, but, if I move to 11, I don't really expect it to change much. So that's just kind of a public service announcement. If you have an Intel processor that has the big core, little core architecture, you're doing yourself a disservice if you're still on Windows 10. Take it from somebody who is actually on Windows 10. You'll probably just wait till Arrow Lake or whatever the next Intel platform is called, or go AMD potentially. That should be good. Yeah, 13700K on Windows 11 is totally fine. Like, there's really no... To be honest, like, you're not really going to gain much of anything if you upgrade to the 14th generation. Like, if you were to go to a 14th gen CPU from what you have now, you might end up with buyer's remorse because you're really not going to see much of a difference in terms of your day-to-day operation. So, yeah, you're pretty much set on that platform until Arrow Lake or Zen 5 or whatever, yeah. So, if we look here, I don't know where they're getting these KS numbers, considering this thing doesn't actually exist, but they're trying to claim 6.2 on the boost for the P-core. But realistically, so let's take a look at this briefly here. So 14900K does 6 gigahertz, That is exactly the same as the 13900KS. You upgraded from the you went to the X3D, was a better option than the 13 since you run Windows 10. Yeah, if you're on Windows 10, don't get big core little core. Take it from me. Now, Intel, I will say that the Alder Lake was a lot worse. Like Alder Lake had serious latency issues and also to a lesser extent memory stability issues that a lot of people don't really talk about. I know the guy from PC World, not Gordon, but what is the name of that guy? The co-host on PC World, he mentioned that he had a lot of memory stability issues with the 12900K on DDR5. But I don't know how much of that was actually memory, because the problem with Alder Lake, the problem with the 12th gen, that a lot of people in the tech news or the tech space, they don't really talk about this. But the problem with Alder Lake was Alder Lake launched when DDR5 was so expensive that you pretty much ignored DDR5 and you just went with DDR4. So like in my case, I went with DDR4 with the 12700K back in 2021. And I had a lot of problems with that platform. And that is the main reason why I'm actually using Zen 4 today, because I had a lot of issues with Windows 10 putting things on eCores to the point where I'd be running some games and literally the game would just kind of like either it would stutter, 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 and then go back to normal, then stutter, 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 then go back to normal for a while, or it would literally just fatal crash, DX error. And I was thinking, it can't be the game, it can't be the driver, because the old PC did not do this. Why is my new 12700K crashing my games? Because I have the same exact GPU, I have the same exact Windows installed with the new chipset drivers, I wiped all the old stuff, I did the DDU, I did all that stuff, and it's still crashing in Final Fantasy XIV. And I kid you not, the thing that fixed it was to go into the BIOS and disable all the eCores. Once I disabled all the eCores and turned my 12700K into an 8-core, 16-thread, aka I turned a 12700K into 11700K, then all the problems magically went away when I turned off the eCores. So, and my understanding is that Alder Lake, 12th gen in particular, had terrible latency problems with Windows 10 because the eCores run so much slower than the P-cores. We're talking like the difference between like 5 gigahertz and like 3.4, 3.6 gigahertz. We're talking like a 1500, potentially a 1500 megahertz difference. That differential is so much that some game threads, if they get pushed onto a thread and the timing is just kind of messed up with the way that game engine works, because I'm not talking about Unreal Engine, I'm talking about like Square Enix and their old janky stuff from a decade ago. The game didn't like it sometimes. Sometimes it'd be fine. Like I could run the game for like 3 hours and do like a raid session, no problem. But, you know, other times it would just randomly, fatally crash. And I don't know why it's crashing. The only thing that changed was the CPU and the motherboard. And I turned the eCores off. It's not crashing anymore. So that tells you it was something with eCores and Windows 10 on 12th gen. Now, 13th gen, speaking from my own experience, 13th generation, problem solved, because the eCores on the 13th gen run a lot faster. They run at like 4.3, 4.4 gigahertz versus like 3.5 or whatever. So they're running like a lot faster. So ever since I did that, I don't have those problems anymore. But I'm not going to get rid of my 12700K because my 12700K is a magical 12700K. It's one of those Alder Lake CPUs from launch that can actually secretly do AVX 512 instructions. I just need to have a motherboard BIOS that will allow me to do that, because the one that I had doesn't allow it. But yeah, that's the one thing that my 12700K can do that my 13th generation CPU cannot do. Stream lagging. Oh yeah, it looks like it is lagging a bit. Okay, you may have to refresh it. Try refreshing it. It should be good now. It's kicking you off. It shouldn't do it anymore. Says slow connection speed, about 600 kilobit. Yeah, you may have to... It should come back. Let me see here. No, try... Yeah, it should be good now. You know what was happening? Steam decided to try to update PUBG. Steam started doing an update for PUBG, and PUBG, it wanted to update like a 60 gigabyte file, and I'm like, yeah, no, you're not downloading that right now. So that's why Steam decided to do a PUBG update in the middle of a stream, and it started killing my internet. So I'm like, yeah, no, you turn that off. Maybe for a little bit. I don't know. I'm really waiting for Lords of the Fallen to become available. I really want to play Lords of the Fallen. But yeah. Yeah. I am actually... So what I would recommend for people, if anybody wants to go Intel, and if you're on a... I don't know. It's kind of hard to recommend Intel right now, because next year Intel's going to have far more interesting and compelling options. Like a year from now, Intel's going to launch their Arrow Lake desktop, and that thing is going to be awesome. At least I think it is. I mean, it's going to be Intel's... Let's put it this way. Next year, Intel is going to start doing chiplet-based CPUs. So they're going to be just like AMD in that regard, where they're going to have little chiplets for different parts of their CPU. It's no longer going to be a mono block in terms of the design. So I'm actually very interested in knowing or learning how that new next generation architecture from Intel is going to perform. So this 14th stuff is really only for somebody like... Who would I recommend this for? If you're on 13th generation, I don't think this is worth getting. This is basically a refresh. It's literally called Raptor Lake Refresh. So if you're on this, there's no reason to get this. Think of this. Think of the 14th generation like a Super. If you guys remember 2080 Super, 2070 Super. This is the same... Well, I don't even know if this is even that extreme. Like, this might even be less of a change. Other than the i7. This is less of a change. This is more like a new revision of the CPU. However, Intel decided to change the name, even though this is literally just the second revision of a Raptor Lake CPU. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't recommend this for someone who's on 13th generation. Now, if somebody is on Alder Lake, if someone is on 12th generation, maybe I could see them going to this. However, the one caveat is I would recommend that you definitely wait for reviews. I will be very interested in seeing how the 14th gen compares to the 12th generation, because the 13 was an okay uplift over the 12th generation, especially on the DDR5 memory support. However, the 14th generation, even though it's going to be a slightly tweaked 13th gen, it'll largely perform very similar to 13th gen. I think, like, if I was somebody on, like, I'm just thinking from my own personal experience, because I had a 12700K. If I was still running the 12700K, would I get the 14th generation? I would strongly consider it. Let's put it that way. I would strongly consider upgrading from 12th gen to 14th gen, because you can keep your existing motherboard. Because Intel has learned how to be more like AMD. In the past, Intel gave you 2 CPUs per socket. That was it. Every time, so you had, like, for example, you could do Haswell 4770K on Z87. You could also do Broadwell, which was the i7 like the 5775S. You could do that on the exact same motherboard. But then if you wanted to go to Skylake, you had to buy a brand new motherboard, and you had to buy a DDR4. So you had to buy new memory, you had to buy a new motherboard to get to the i7 6700K. Then you could do Kaby Lake, aka i7 7700K, on the exact same motherboard. So you didn't have to upgrade the motherboard if you wanted that drop-in upgrade. However, you want to go to the i780 700K, that requires a new motherboard. And then after that, you had 9900K, but Intel was, I think, Intel was kind of weird. Like, they made Z390 for the i9 9900K, but I think you could potentially run Z370 with the i9. I don't remember anymore. All I know is that you had to swap out Intel motherboards like every other CPU. Like, you had to swap out your motherboard. Then AMD came along with Zen, and you could do Zen 1, Zen Plus, Zen 2, Zen 3. You could do all 4 of the CPUs all in the exact same socket. And then they had the 3D V-cache on top of that. So you potentially had like 5 different lines of CPUs, including that 4000 series as well. Like that Zen 2 Plus. That also was a thing. So you had like 5, 6 different lines of CPUs that could all go in the exact same socket. So I think Intel took, they learned a lesson there. Because now you're doing 3 CPUs of Intel on the same socket. You got 12, 13, and 14 all in the same socket. So they're kind of learning. That's good to see. But it took their competition to teach them how to do that. That's kind of weird. I think going from a 12 to a 14 or that would be a decent upgrade, but not for anything higher end. Yeah, exactly. So basically the only people that I think can consider the 14th gen is anybody who is on 12. Anyone who's on 12, even the 12900K, but even the 12900K, your upgrade options are pretty limited. There's really just the 14700K and maybe the 14900K, but I think the 14700K is probably going to be the most bang for buck upgrade that you could get, because you're going to get better E-cores, they're faster, there's more of them, and you're going to get that improvement from the Raptor Lake refresh architecture versus Alder Lake. If you step up to the i9, you're not really getting anything at that point except more E-cores. So I think you get a little bit more L3 cache or something, but I mean that's basically the difference. And the out-of-box boost is higher. That's going to go to 6 gigahertz on the single thread. Cypher saying you had AM4 before that. Really good, mature platform with longevity. You kind of wish you went AM5. Yeah, because the thing with AM5, the motherboards are going to be the same motherboards. So, well, actually, no. Next year, Zen 5. Actually, we should probably use Paint for this section here. Hold on. Let's go to Paint. So, well, actually, what did I want to even write here? I guess who should consider upgrading to 14th gen? Answer: anyone with 12th gen. Otherwise, no one else should even consider this platform. Unless you have like a super ancient desktop that ends up dying. Like if the capacitors on your 10, 12-year-old motherboard like literally pop and you have to buy a new motherboard, then I guess you could consider 14th gen. But realistically, I'd probably go AM5 because you're going to get a lot of drop-in socket upgrades. You know, like there's literally one coming next year. Like in the first half of next year. So, I don't know. I kind of think it's literally just for people on 12th gen. Like if I was on, like look at it this way. I'm thinking about it from my own perspective. Like if I still was using my 12700K, yes, I would consider the 14th gen. If I was on an 11700K though, which would require me to change the motherboard and probably buy DDR5, if I was in that scenario, I would probably go AM5. I'd probably get a Zen 4, like a 7800X3D, or I would probably just wait until Zen 5 and get that, or at least look at how that compares with this. So, but I wouldn't wait that much longer, because Zen 5 is probably going to be March of next year. You will be able to overclock that to 6. Yeah, exactly. So the i9 is kind of redundant. For some reason, you wanted to wait for AM5 to mature a bit. Yeah, Cypher, yeah. That's actually a good idea. Because here's the thing. So let's talk about AM5 now. Because we kind of did our thing about Intel. So here's the thing. Zen 1's launch in 2017 was, how should I put this? Janky. It was very jank. The Zen 1 launch was very scuffed and very janky. It was off to kind of a rough start. I think of it like this ragtag band consisting of Lisa Su and Jim Keller back when he was still there, although he left before the Zen 1 launch, and the engineers at AMD. The guys that you guys saw, if you guys watched Gamers Nexus video where they went and they visited the AMD campus in Austin, Texas, like those guys, Amit and all that team, like I just imagine them like the ragtag band, like getting Zen out the door. It was a janky launch. DDR4 was okay. AMD basically went to DDR4. DDR4 was new. Like, it was new for AMD. Like, prior to that, Bulldozer, Pile Driver, Steamroller, Excavator, all those construction equipment CPUs, essentially, they were all DDR3 based. So AMD made the jump to DDR4, and lo and behold, it was janky because DDR4, you know, trying to run like 3200 megahertz was trying to move Mount Everest, so to speak, for some motherboards and for some people who weren't so lucky with their IMC. You know, like in my case, I ran an 1800X with 16 gigabytes of Samsung B die at 3200 on an Asus Crosshair 6 X370 Hero. And I could do 3200 megahertz fine. Now, as soon as I went to 4 sticks, I added 2 more of those Samsung B die. G-Skill Flare X. Everybody knows exactly what... Anyone who was on Zen 1 knows exactly what RAM I'm talking about. The Flare X, DDR4, 3200 megahertz, Samsung B die, 1434 timings, 1.35 volts. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. That magical RAM... You had that RAM, you were golden, and it was okay. But anything else, no. Like, no. It was not a fun time. So fast forward to, okay, Zen Plus. Zen Plus, did I say Zen? Yeah, okay, launched in 2018. It was okay. Like, it was okay. It was okay. Like, it was largely improved. You could potentially do 16 gigabyte, 3200 megahertz, but then you were kind of limited by the motherboard. But they launched with X470. X470 was new. I guess we'll just say DDR4 with X370. That was the chipset. So the reason why I'm doing this is because because Cypher, or was it Cypher? No, Ramon. Somebody was saying, basically someone was saying like they're waiting for it to mature. And that's actually good. That's a good approach to have, because when Zen 2 launched in 2019, all the memory problems went away. All the memory problems, I probably should have cleaned this up. All the memory problems went away with X570. A lot of people forget that X570 is a pretty old chipset by today's standards, because it was the first chipset to introduce X570 with PCIe 4. PCIe 4.0, this chipset was the first chipset in the world to introduce PCIe Gen 4. So you got that with Zen 2 and the X570 chipset back in 2019. This was kind of the time, this was the turning point. This was the turning point, and I still remember Linus at Computex walking down the street in Taiwan, and they were filming that video, and he was talking about how Zen 2 with PCIe 4 was going to bring about some change, because in terms of like CPU market share for Intel and AMD, because for the first time in history, in a long, long time, AMD finally caught up to Intel for the most part in terms of the IPC. Like in terms of the single thread performance, they got really, really close. In some scenarios, Intel was still a little bit faster. But by and large, AMD finally closed that gap in terms of single thread with Zen 2. That was the Ryzen 3000 series. And that's the reason why, out of all of AMD's CPUs, the Ryzen 3000 is still so heavily saturated out there in the market. There are still tons of people running Ryzen 5 3600 and maybe a Ryzen 9 like 3900X or something along those lines. Because this was the first time they introduced the 16-core 32-thread, aka the 3950X, and that's ultimately what started the death of the HEDT platform. That's basically what killed Threadripper, and obviously the death of Intel's HEDT. 3950X, a lot of people don't know this, but the 3950X, when it launched in around November of 2019, because all the other Zen 2 stuff came out in the summer, it was like July 7th, 2019 or something. But like when the 3950X launched, that was kind of like your fate is sealed for the X299 from Intel, the Skylake X. That basically said, Skylake X, you're basically dead. Because it's like, why would anybody buy that now? You know, and then same thing with Threadripper. Like, but AMD did launch Threadripper 3000 series. Like the Zen 2 based Threadripper. I remember when those came out. And those things literally dominated every production like workstation in existence. Threadripper 3000 was so good that Linus, he converted his entire team's editing rigs over to Threadripper 3000. They all were running like, I think the 3970 or the 3990W or something. Like they were running like the super high end Threadripper, like 3000. And I know Linus was kind of salty about that because AMD on the consumer side, AMD was great because it's like, oh, you can do a drop-in upgrade and keep the same motherboard. When you look at Threadripper 3000, AMD did not do that. AMD they kind of like stopped support for it. They literally just did Threadripper 3000, and then 5000 came out, but it came out way later, and it was on a different socket. So it's like, in the consumer market, AMD is like the champion. It's the people's hero. It's the people's champion. Because it's like, oh, it's great. You can keep the same motherboard and just keep doing drop-in upgrades every couple of years. But on the prosumer side, with Threadripper, AMD did not do that. They did one socket for 3000. Now, I got to give them credit. So for the first Threadripper, you could do Threadripper 1000. So you had Zen 1 Threadripper and you had Zen Plus Threadripper, which is the 2950X. That's the one that I actually have. So they did those two on X399. But, like I said earlier, X570 with PCI Gen 4 and the Ryzen 9 basically killed off Threadripper, like Zen Plus Threadripper, overnight. It also killed off Intel's like X299 Skylake X. That was also collateral damage when they launched that. So they killed off Threadripper, then they killed off Intel in the collateral, and then they proceeded to launch like the big Threadripper, which was the Zen 2 Threadripper. Linus and everybody went and got those things, hoping that, or the assumption was that, oh, they're going to get like, 5000 series on that in a couple of years. Well, it turns out they never did. And he kind of never got over that. That was something that he was kind of salty about that for a while. So that's Threadripper, though. So then we had Zen 3 in 2020 with X570S. Now the S stands for silent. Because if you guys remember, X570 had a fan on the chipset. So this one did not have the fan. They matured that chipset. They don't need the fan anymore because they dropped the wattage down from like 12 to 15 watts all the way down to like 5 watts. So they didn't need the fan anymore. So this launched in 2020. And, this was kind of that magical year. I've talked about this before. This is the year, 2020 was that year where AMD went from being like semi-tied with Intel to slightly just behind them, but technically above them because they had better multi-thread, because they had a 16-core with the 3950X. They went from like being kind of equal to Intel to being like faster than Intel in single thread and multi-thread, because Zen 3 basically like hands down beat Intel in everything. Like you look at single thread, they win. You look at multi-thread, they win. You look at energy efficiency and performance per watt, Zen 3 won. So that's why I always say that 2020 was the magical year for AMD, because that was the year where like so many products launched that were made by AMD, or they had AMD like at the core. For example, Ryzen 5000, RDNA 2 launched, 6900 XT came out that year. And nobody thought that AMD would be able to match NVIDIA, and then all of a sudden 6800 XT is able to match the 3080, and then 6900 XT is very competitive with 3090 while costing $1,000 versus $1,500. So that's why that was kind of the magical year. On top of that, they launched PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S, and all three of those consoles launched in 2020, and they were all based off of RDNA 2. That is the reason why I always say that 2020 was kind of that magical year, because it's like everything, it was like the perfect storm for all of these products. And going back to the comment earlier about waiting for the platform to mature, this is the reason why that is actually a good idea. Because if you look at Zen 4 launched 2022. It was I'll say it was semi-janky. It wasn't that bad. It was not like the Zen 1 launch. It was semi-janky because of DDR5. It's really because of DDR5. Every time a CPU architecture or a CPU platform transitions to a new memory standard, you can expect those early adopter issues to crop up. That always happens, like right on cue. So DDR5, like the whole thing about, oh, you can't run fast DDR5 and it's stuck at 6,000, but there's a reason why it's like 6,000 is the magic number. It's because of the way the ratios work, and we talked about that in a previous stream. I might do a video on that, but the way that the architecture works was different from the Zen 3 and the Zen 1. So all of these are kind of like the same socket. This is a new socket. So basically it launched. It was semi-janky because it was DDR5. It was new AM5 with DDR5. So that's kind of the reason why. But next year, it launches first half, well, we'll just say 2023. We'll just say first half 2023. And I expect it's going to be like the Zen 2 launch. So Zen 4 was kind of like Zen 1 because it was the first time going to DDR5. It was a new socket, just like this was a new socket. So basically everything's new. So you expect those early adopter issues to crop up in the beginning, and sure enough they did. But I think at this point in time, all the BIOS, it's like there's a year's worth of BIOS updates now. So it's actually mostly smooth sailing now at this point. Like if someone wanted to go to Zen 4. But having said that, Zen 5 I expect to be significantly better in terms of not just the performance compared to Zen 4. I expect the memory compatibility and the overall user experience of Zen 5 to be significantly better compared to the early days of Zen 4. So, yeah. So that's why it's a good idea to wait. So the whole comment earlier about waiting for the platform to mature, yes. There's a reason why, like, let's put it this way. I recommended a lot of people that I knew either keep DDR4 and go, like, X3D, like 5800X3D, because of DDR5. Because DDR5 was expensive back then, and it didn't really offer many benefits, and there was potential issues with motherboards not being able to hit certain speeds or advertised speeds. And then also the CPU IPC, or the IMC of the quality of the memory controller on Zen 4 was kind of like Intel's 12th gen, because that was Intel's first DDR5, and that had issues as well. And Z690 was part of the problem there. But anyway, that's kind of like my take on the CPU upgrade path. So who should get 14th gen, or who should consider 14th gen? Anybody who's on Alder Lake. Everyone else need not apply. And then next year with Zen 5, it's a new socket. If you're not on Zen 4, it's a pretty obvious drop-in upgrade for anybody on AM4, or Zen 4, aka AM5. But if you're on like Zen 2 or Zen 3, I'd probably wait till Zen 5 at this point. Since we're not that far out from Zen 5, you're only waiting until like the end of Q1 of next year, or sometime in like April of next year is basically when I expect it, if not sooner. So, but we should definitely know more about Zen 5 during CES, like in January next year. So, because that would track with AMD's kind of like that 18-month window. So that puts us around March for the actual Zen 5 launch. So, anyway, that's pretty much all I had for this stream. Using Flare X5 now on the 750X because you didn't want to take the chance of instability. Yeah, the Micro Center Flare X5 is the free memory that Micro Center offers too. It's weird because there's two variants. There's the SK Hynix one and there's like the Samsung one. Most of it's all Samsung though. For Flare X5. Anyway, that's all I had for this stream. I will probably be streaming. So, for those that are curious, I do plan to stream a decent chunk of my Lords of the Fallen playthrough tomorrow. So, do expect live streams from me tomorrow. But it will basically be me playing through Lords of the Fallen. If you want to stop by and just kind of like say hello, or we can talk technology if needed. I don't expect to use Paint. I'm not going to have a whole bunch of like articles to talk about. It's basically just going to be me playing Lords of the Fallen and going in blind. So, but I thought I would stream that. I'm probably going to do a video series, kind of like I did for Starfield. But this will be looking at Lords of the Fallen performance because Lords of the Fallen is a game that I'm actually interested in, and it is a UE5 game that uses Lumen and Nanite for the global illumination. So that'll be interesting to see how that runs on various GPUs. And I may do some CPU videos as well. I don't think UE5... Like, in terms of my CPUs, I have 3 CPUs that I can showcase. Those CPUs are a 7950X3D, an Intel 13900K, and a standard 7950X. So for those that are curious, tomorrow I will be streaming the game Lords of the Fallen on a 7950X paired up with a Sapphire Nitro 7900 XTX. And if I do another stream later in the day, I will look at how the game performs with a 7950X3D paired up with an NVIDIA Founders Edition RTX 4090. So if you're curious in how, and I will be playing the game at 4K resolution with both graphics cards. So if you're interested in looking at how a UE5 game that is not Fortnite performs at 4K with Nanite and Lumen enabled. And we may look at FSR 3 as well, and DLSS 3. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned for the channel, like the notifications. I guess hit the notification button to know when I go live. But I will be doing various streams tomorrow, like throughout the day. So I'm talking about like daytime streaming, not evening streaming. I will probably do an evening stream as well. So the evening will probably be 4090 and X3D. The daytime stream will probably be 7950X plus the XTX. Oh, Matt's asking what did I think about the last comment. Will you still be able to overclock? Oh, no. You went from a... Since it's on par with the high end. See, I think the 7800 XT is actually better than the 13th gen. I mean, I'm going to test the game. I'm going to test the game on this and this. So I'll be able to, like, compare how the UE5 title, does on an Intel versus an AMD X3D. And I personally think the X3D is consistently better. And that's the reason why I have the 4090 paired up specifically with this CPU compared to the other CPUs that I have at my disposal. So, Lords of the Fallen uses a lot of tech that future games will use for this gen. Apparently, the console's struggling with it. Well, the consoles are doing okay. The consoles are able to do 1080p 60 for the performance mode or 1440p 30 with the visual mode. I mean, like, you may have missed... Cypher probably wasn't here at the beginning of the stream, but the first thing I did was... I looked at NVIDIA. NVIDIA did a kind of an article showcasing Lords of the Fallen's performance. And if you look at this... I don't want to spend too much time on this because we already talked about this. But if you look at these results, the 4060, which is kind of similar to a PlayStation 5 and an Xbox Series X, It does 39 frames per second at native resolution at 1440p. Now, PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X do 1440p 30 frames per second. Now, I'm expecting there's a hint of dynamic resolution scaling depending on the scene complexity that's enabled by default for the consoles. So there is also that. However, if you look at the 1080p results, so 1080p, I don't know why this is like moving around. Okay, 1080p, RTX 4060, like I just said, is similar to PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. 1080p, the 4060 does about 63 frames per second at native 1080p. That is in line with the 1080p 60 FPS performance mode on the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. So I think that's pretty accurate. So yeah, like if you're on 1440p and you have a modern GPU, particularly one that has frame generation, whether it's AMD's RDNA 3 with FSR 3, because that's also going to be in the game, and we are going to be looking at that tomorrow in depth. If you have a modern either Ada NVIDIA 40 series or an AMD RDNA 3, and you have a modern GPU, I think 1440p is doable with frame generation, as shown here by NVIDIA's own results. Now, the only problem is if you're gaming at 4K. Like, if you're gaming at 4K, you basically have to have the flagship GPUs, because otherwise you're not really going to be able to do like a 60 FPS consistent experience. Kind of ignore these green bars from NVIDIA, because these are kind of like, they for some reason they chose to test with performance. Like, they chose the performance preset, which is garbage. So it's not like the quality preset. I don't know why they just didn't do quality preset. I think they did it because the 4070 with frame gen probably is going to be below 60 if they do quality preset. That's my guess. And they kind of wanted to show that you could get 60 plus on all these GPUs. But yeah. Will you be able to join VC at all tonight or this weekend? Most of tomorrow will be live streaming Lords of the Fallen. I mean, I might be able to join for a small amount of time after this stream. But I'm kind of waiting for Lords of the Fallen to like become available so I can actually jump in there and get through the tutorial section, so I'm not wasting time on stream just like trying to create a character and do all the basic stuff. I also want to test different classes. Like, I want to test the casters, the tanks, the DPS, the ranged, physical, etc. I want to test all of those. So, yeah, I'll probably go in there for I don't know, maybe 30 minutes or so. But anyway, that's probably going to be it for this stream, guys. If you're interested in like checking out how the game runs at 4K native, 4K with frame gen, 4K with like FSR 3, DLSS 3, hit the notification to see how this game runs at those resolutions live. We're all going to be running it from a single PC setup. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here. And once again, thank you all for tuning in and watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.